Good afternoon, folks. Welcome. All right, we're going to get started here in just a moment. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You're here with Community Nature Connection and Antonio Sanchez, and this is our Native Plants for the Winter Garden class. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is Celeste Gasparic. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Training Institute Manager with Community Nature Connection. I am joining you today from Northeast LA, the ancestral village of Otsunga of the Tongva Gabrielino peoples. And I would love to hear where you all are joining us from for today's class. So if you would share your introductions with us in the chat, that would be awesome. You can go ahead and share your name, your pronouns, where you're joining us from today, and any organization you might be representing. And we also encourage you to share what ancestral land you're joining from today. If you're not sure about that, you can look it up, and I will drop a link in the chat for you to do so right now. And awesome to have you all with us today. Please do share your introductions with us in the chat. Want to let folks know that closed captioning is available for this training, and you can access those captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitles. So I'd like to begin today's class by acknowledging the land on which Community Nature Connection operates as the ancestral lands and home of the Tongva, Gabrielino, Tataviam, and Chumash people. We recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. CNC strives to create partnerships and collaborate with local tribes to expand equitable outdoor programming to all. And if you are not familiar with our organization, Community Nature Connection is a nonprofit, community-based org. We serve the Los Angeles area, and our mission is to increase access to the outdoors for communities impacted by racial, socioeconomic, and disability injustices. We do so by eliminating barriers to the outdoors through advocacy, community-centered programming, and workforce development. And today you're here at this class. It's part of the Training Institute, which is one of our programs. The Training Institute provides training and workforce development opportunities aiming to increase knowledge, skills, and representation in the outdoor field. So we're going to get started in just a moment. But I want to let you all know that we're going to be taking your questions. We'll pause a couple of times throughout today's training for questions. And so as you have questions as they arise, you can use the Q&A box, and you'll see a little button at the bottom of your screen for Q&A box. And so you can go ahead and enter your questions in there as they arise, and that will help us keep track of them. You'll be able to see other folks' questions in there too. So if you want to like any other questions that you might have the same one, then you can do that, and we'll get to those. And then any resources that come up today during the training are going to be shared with you all in a follow-up email, and the training is also being recorded. So if you miss anything or you want to go back and check something out, you can get the recording and any resources after the training's over in a follow-up email. So I am going to stop talking now, and without any further ado, hand it over to today's trainer. Antonio Sanchez is joining us today from the Santa Monica Mountains Fund for California Native Plants for the Winter Garden. So thank you so much for being here, Antonio, and take it away.
Right on, Celeste. Thank you. Celeste, can you hear me? Good? Thumbs up? Are we good?
Yep, sounds
all right. Great. It's on. How long do we have, Celeste? Is it a 4-hour class?
We have folks until 2:30.
Oh, okay. Well, I have 4 hours worth of stuff, so I'm gonna shove it in your guys' ear in the next hour and a half. So I do a lot of classes, and I have, man, this is the most boring screen también. Look at this. When you can tell when I don't have enough time to prepare, look at how boring that screen is. Let me switch screens just so there, that's prettier. So I want to thank you guys for showing up. I give a lot of classes. I probably give like 2 to 4 classes a month. And we had like what 60 people register, Celeste? And we had like there's 25 people here right now. And I've done it before, but it's just nice to have people show up when they say they're gonna show up. It's really cool. So I appreciate that you guys are here. All the other energy that I was gonna give to the other 35 people that didn't show up, I'm gonna give to you guys. So I've been working with native plants for a long time now. And let me start from the beginning. Where's this boring there? What's this talk called? Putting native plants for winter garden, or how to stop stealing plants from native nature and grow your own in a garden or containers. So I asked Celeste, I hit her up through email, and I was all, Celeste, let's do some more classes for winter, because winter is a time when native plant gardens can sometimes look no me gusta, like a little bit boring for some people. There's a lot going on. I would never call them boring, but some people might say they're boring. There's not enough flowers. We want more color, blah blah blah, etc. So this is a group of 2 classes that me and Celeste came up with. The first one is today, so we're gonna go over some plants that you guys may want to use for winter. I'll explain what I mean by winter, and it's definitely not uh, the definition that you find on Wikipedia for winter. And then the next class, which I think is probably the better class. I'm sorry if you guys can't, if you can only on this one, is an online class on maintenance. And I think the winter maintenance is probably the most important class you could take once you've gotten your garden in. Because to me, native plants are like relationships. Relationships are really easy. It's really easy if you have the cash to go buy plants, to go install them, and they look pretty for a year or two. It's like dating someone. It's very easy to go out with someone, to be physically attracted to them, hang out for a year or two. But usually relationships can get complicated. Then you start to live with the person, know the person, there's kids involved, etc. And that's the maintenance part of the garden that I think is super important. I don't even know my schedule, Celeste. What day is that class? Do you know? What is it? January something?
January 19th.
So that is an online class. And directly after that, so the weekend after that, I'm gonna have a hands-on maintenance class where I work, which in that case will be Calabasas, or kind of the border between Ventura and LA County in the Santa Monica Mountains, where I'll invite you guys to come and actually do some of the physical maintenance. Some of you probably know December and January is almost like the best time to do physical maintenance of native plants. That's when we do about probably 75% of our physical maintenance of plants, and we'll be giving away free plants at that time too. So I encourage you guys I'm getting ahead of myself. I can't even. It's a good thing we have 4 hours. So today, outline for class is going to be, we're going to talk about native plants real quick. And I'm going to give you a few tips that I love to go over because I think they're really important when you're talking about native plants. Then I'll go into my list of native plants for the winter. You guys can ask any questions that you have through chat. If we get enough of these questions, if someone's like, hey, what did you say this? Or, why this or whatever, then we'll try to answer maybe in the middle of the class. If not, we can wait till the end of the class. Again, I do have a program. I'm blessed enough to work at the Santa Monica Mountains. I don't work for the national parks, but I work alongside the national parks, hand in hand. And we do have a grant where we're able to offer free plants to the community. And so if you're interested in those plants, you can hit me up through this email, antoniosanchez@sanwofund.org. And after an hour and a half, we're all going to get kicked out. Before I begin, I definitely have to give thanks. My first plant job was on farms in New Mexico and in Northern California. So I have a background in sustainable agriculture. And my first native plant job was at CalFlora Nursery up in Sonoma County. And I've worked at all of these places. I've worked at Theodore Payne Foundation. I used to work at Rancho Santa Ana. I ran the nurseries there for 4 years. It's now called California Botanic Garden. I used to work at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Now I work in the Santa Monica Mountains. I used to think this was a cool list of places that I work, but now it just seems like I can't hold a job for more than a year or two. It sounds really cool for a while, and I'm like, well, maybe I can't just keep a job somewhere. Me and my cousin, my primo, and a very good friend opened up Nopalito Native Plant Nursery, and that was probably my best native plant nursery experience. We ran a retail nursery where we grew our own plants and sold to the public for about 4 years. If you guys want to know why native plants aren't more popular and why they're more around, um, just know we used to think that one of our logos or one of our sayings was going to be native plants and capitalism don't mix. They are very, very hard to force on the people, not force on the people, but when you have the whole world, when you have Mexico, when you have Brazil, when you have South Africa, when you have Cambodia, when you have Russia, when you have all of these countries to pick from, and Home Depot can order any of those plants. And as a native plant nursery, you're deciding to segregate yourself and only sell stuff from what is the political and climate boundaries of California. It becomes really hard to compete. But we learned a lot, and I'm really glad that we did that. So anyways, I know a lot of great folks in the native indigenous community here in California and that work alongside the native indigenous community here in California that I'm thankful for. I've just learned from so many folks. And I definitely wouldn't even be giving this talk without having learned from them. So I want to thank them. I want to invite you guys, if you're interested, to email me. I do have a free 7-week horticulture training program that we offer at the parks. Unfortunately, you do have to drive to the park. So some of them are in Newbury Park and some of them are in Calabasas. And I understand that that's not the most convenient for a lot of folks, but it is a free program. And some of it is online, and we show you how to do cuttings. We show you how to collect seed, how to do installation of plants, etc. If you're interested, that next one is starting in January. You can email me. And we do have classes where we do seed cleaning. We have a seed cleaning class tomorrow in the parks. We have the same exact seed cleaning class on Saturday. We have some restoration planting events going on. If you guys are interested, all of this is available if you Google Samo Fund Eventbrite. Samo Fund is who I work for, and Eventbrite is this website where all these classes are taking place. So Google that and you'll find all of our free classes. Man, that how long was that to just even get to the start of the talk? So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. There's over 6,000 plants native to California. Usually people ask, what is a California native plant? For us, for me, a California native plant is something that occurs in the political or climate boundary of California, which is, the state of California, or the Mediterranean part of California, which is kind of the top, maybe a fifth or fourth of Baja, up into Oregon even. They kind of have similar climates all the way through California on the coast. And that's what we call kind of California native plants. And the second question I usually get is, why are these plants so ugly? And I feel bad for our native plants because they're not ugly. They're amazing. They're really tough compared to roses that you might find at Home Depot, compared to stuff that folks are giving out at their weddings. Our plants are incredibly tough because they can tolerate 3 inches of rain one year, 20 inches of rain the next year, 118 degrees one summer, 94 degrees the next summer, 4 months of no rain, 7 months of no rain sometimes. So I don't think our plants are ugly. Maybe they're not as pretty as plants from Bolivia or Brazil that get water, 11 months out of the year, but our plants, I think, are something to be respected and are intensely, intensely amazing. But the point I'm talking about all this is that most of the plants I'm going to talk about today are directly from native nature. So if you've done something for over 1,000 years, every year, you're going to remember that. It's a really strong habit to break. And so I think people have a hard time with native plants, especially when they haven't done too many, because they have most of the stuff they've used is from Home Depot, or maybe they live in an apartment building or a house that has leftover plants, and usually they're not native. And so those plants are very tolerant of summer water because they come from places that get summer water. Our native plants don't. So if anything, I will definitely email you guys. I'll email Celeste this list, this whole, PowerPoint and this whole list of plants. But if you guys don't go away with anything else today, if you don't know this already, remember that the plants that you're working with for the last thousands of years have been wet, cold. They're used to it November to March, and they're used to being dry April to October. And that's the most important part when we grow them, is we want to do most of our landscaping, we want to do most of our work November to March, and minimal work April to October. If you guys can remember that, you're going to be in a really good spot. Like I said, I came from a sustainable ag background, growing corn, chiles, biodynamics, till. I wanted to start a hip hop group when I was in community college called the NPK All Stars, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus All Stars. It was really bad. We played 2 shows. We opened up for Kanye. We were crazier than Kanye, not Kanye West, it was Kanye East. I'm going way off topic right here. But I know all of that. And I know that March, April, May is when you do your gardening for those things. And it took me a long time to realize that our plants are not Central Mexican plants. And that's why we plant corn in April, May, and June, because corn is used to water and heat. That's what it remembers. Our plants remember something completely different. So let's try to reset our minds when we're doing something with native plants, with California native plants. Today, the plants I'm going to be talking about are not the high desert plants. There's some beautiful plants. If you drive out to Vegas and you get past Baker where that beautiful thermometer is, and then you drive 2 hours out into the desert, into the beautiful like New York mountains or wherever you go out there, we're not talking about those plants today. We're not talking about redwood forest plants that you go past Sonoma County along the coast where fog feeds the top 100 feet of the leaves almost every day. We're not talking about those, and we're not talking about alpine meadow plants, which are past 7,000 or 8,000 feet, covered under snow for a lot of the year. And when the sun hits and it's 100 degrees down here in Southern California, it might be 80 degrees. We're not talking about any of those plants today. Most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today is native to Southern California, native to the LA basin, native to within 100 miles of where most people live in Southern California. And it's a very specific climate that I'm going to be talking about. So a very specific type of plant for you guys. And remember, our plants, those plants remember wet and cool. It might only be 2 inches, but they remember cool and wet during the winter, and they remember hot and dry during the summer. And so I want to tell you guys a story. You guys have seen most of my classes. You probably have heard this story before, but I think it's really important. It helps people understand, it helps me understand what I'm doing with the native plant. And to tell it, I have to tell the story, which I hate the background of the story, and I hate how racist and other things it is. But it's just a sad story about this last, what they call wild. I hate that word. I don't want to cuss online, but I just hate that word. But the last wild native Californian, his name was Ishi. This was in the early 1900s, and Ishi's people had all died. This was in Northern California, maybe in the Humboldt, not the Humboldt area, north of Sacramento. And so all of Ishi's people, his family, his tribe had all died. Ishi had no family, and he was sick. No one knew that he existed in what we call the Western world, right? Ishi knew he existed, but Ishi was sick, and he left his ancestral lands, and he stumbled upon get close to a town, and a sheriff from a town found him, and he helped Ishi out. And the sheriff had a friend in the Bay Area in San Francisco who was an anthropologist, and he contacted the anthropologist. Ishi got sent over to San Francisco. He got his hair cut. He started wearing Western clothing, pants and shirts. And the anthropologist became pretty good friends with Ishi. I think as good a friend as you could without knowing the language, learning the language, right? Being in this area that you might not understand, this world that you might not understand. Anyways, long story short, Ishi and the anthropologist went back to Ishi's home. And the anthropologist wanted to see the plants that Ishi's people used to use, the water, where they used to get their water, how they used to live, how they used to fight, medicine they used to use, ceremonies, etc. And I could imagine going back with Ishi, and if Ishi had 50 people, 100 people, 150, if his tribe was intact, if his people were intact, that Ishi could just go right back in and get lost. And that anthropologist would not have to supply Ishi with anything. That anthropologist could come back and say hi to Ishi, and Ishi would welcome him in, hopefully, and say, "Hey, come on, kick it. Let's go to the river. We're gonna go fish. Cool." But there was nothing that Ishi would need from that anthropologist when he's in his home with a complete family, with a complete tribe, etc. And so I see the same thing happening when we take our plants, our Southern California plants. I'm talking about some of the ribes, the currants, and the gooseberries I'm going to talk about today. Some of the lemonade berries I'm going to talk about today. Some of the sages I'm going to talk about today. Some of the manzanitas I'm going to talk about today. Those are ishi. When we put them in our landscapes in Southern California, they are going back home. They remember how to live here. They have the right amount of water that they've had for thousands of years. They have the types of soils usually that they've had for thousands of years, and they need very little for us. And so what if that anthropologist came to Ishi every, let's say, 30 days and said, Ishi, I'm coming to visit you. This is, I guess they got cell phones. Let's imagine they have cell phones. He's like, Ishi, I'm going to come visit you. I got some beer. I got some pizza. Ishi might say, bring it. Once a month, Ishi has this lactose intolerance from eating this pizza and drinking this beer. He gets really drunk. But what happens when that anthropologist friend brings Ishi pizza and beer every week? Then Ishi starts to get overweight. He starts to develop possibly diabetes and other diseases. What if he gives it to him every 2 days? What if he gives it to him every day? And that's what we see happen a lot of times in our native landscapes. And I hate, actually, no, I take that back. I don't hate. I hope you don't take disrespect for me comparing plants to people, but I think plants and people are almost exactly the same. We have traditions that go way back, and that's what we're used to. That's what our bodies are used to. That's what our genetics are used to. And we do the exact same thing by putting a drip system on a white sage and watering it every 2 days. That drip system doesn't know what to do with that pizza. It doesn't know what to do with that beer. Or I'm sorry, that white sage doesn't know what to do with that beer or pizza. And we drown our plants. We overfeed our plants. Our plants get diabetes so fast in the form of overwater, clogged up, nutrient rich clay soil with drip systems that the soil never dries out. And so I want you guys to look at your plants. If you can, you don't have to listen to that. What would you say? But the way I look at my plants is they're coming home. Your plants are coming home. And so the more often you do something to your plants, the more disrespectful it is because your plants don't need it. They've been here for thousands of years without you. Just step the hell back. But also, your plants appreciate being visited every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, but they start to freak out when you start to visit them every 2 days, every 5 days. I see it every year in landscapes. I see it from professionals. I see it from people who are starting with native plants. They overwater, they over fertilize, they overplant all of their plants instead of treating them like they belong here. So if you guys can treat your plants like they belong here and step back, the better we're going to be just to start off with. And so the way I think about it is water, right? We water very little. A white sage, which is one of the prettiest plants that we have in Southern California, will go from April usually to October without any rain. And so why would we need to give it water every 2 days? I think it would love water once a month. I think it would love water maybe every 21 days, but we're asking for a lot to change a plant's genetics to water it every 2 days, every 5 days. That same white sage gets almost no fertilizer in native nature. And so why would we feel the need to add any type of fertilizer almost? There are a few times when I love using fertilizer on native plants. And that's part of my maintenance class. Pruning, why would we need to prune some of our native plants? And if we do, I like to think of plants that we prune as the athletes of the group, or if we want to go back to Ishi, athletes of the tribe. If there's athletes or men or women who are using a lot more energy, right? And for me, a pruned plant is maybe a penstemon, let's call it Heterophyllus, Margarita Bob, a plant that we're cutting the dead flowers and deadheading so that we can get more flowers out of. We can make it stay green longer than it would in native nature. Those plants, we want to thank them. We want to appreciate them with extra water and extra fertilizer. Right? It doesn't make sense to me that a penstemon heterophyllus that wants to go dormant, wants to go to sleep in June and stop flowering, we can keep flowering through August and keep evergreen almost all year, but we're not going to reward it with extra water or extra fertilizer. So there are some plants like we would reward our folks who are working harder and using more calories, we want to give them more food. We do the same thing in landscapes, right? And so that's part of my maintenance class. I'd be happy to go in depth into some of that if you guys have a few questions about that. But basically, the basics of native plant gardening are super easy. You guys want to make sure you try to install everything from November to March. That's like that's the best time. The smaller a plant you can install, the better. The smaller a plant, so a 4-inch, a 5-inch, or a 1-gallon pot is much better to install than a larger plant. I'll explain why in a little bit. Plants, once they've gone through a good rainy season, and they're small, if they're small plants and you've put them through a good rainy season, that's when they've been established. You don't have to wait any longer. They're established. And then once your plants are established, why are you watering your garden? Why are you, as the anthropologist, going to visit Ishi more than once a month? Why are you visiting Ishi more than twice a month? Are you trying to kill Ishi? If you are, then just let's admit it. You're trying to kill your plant. But if you're not, admit that your plant belongs here and you should be treating them as such. There's a great time of year to maintain, and that's the time of year that we get rain. 75% of our landscaping maintenance is done from November to March in most native plant gardens. And then we also want to know, how do we water during the dry season? That's part of that maintenance class that I'm going to have in January. All these questions that landscapers bring, and you can tell that they've usually done roses or they've usually done raised bed food because they asked about soil and they asked about pests. I've been doing this for over 15 years. There's so few gardens that have problems with soils or pests if you pay attention to these few things. Usually these happen because you're not paying attention to these few things. They do happen every now and then. There are pests and soil issues, but they're so rare. Don't even worry about that. Don't even worry. If you guys can do this, these first 6, then you're going to be good with most of the other stuff. And so one website I'm going to use today when I introduce you guys to these beautiful winter flowers or winter plants is the CalFlora website. I love CalFlora. I donate to them. I would recommend you guys donate to them as well, if you can afford it. So part of CalFlora is you can type in a plant. This is white sage, and it'll show you where this plant is native to. And so I would say over 95% of these blue dots are where this plant occurs in what I call native nature. And so this is the natural distribution of this plant. There's a few up here in Berkeley, maybe one in Santa Cruz. These are probably botanic gardens, or maybe they've escaped in the wild, but I don't think white sage can survive in the wild in Northern California. It's too wet. So look at this. So this tells you that white sage, and it goes down in the Baja, really likes 12 inches of rain a year and likes being dry during the summer. And this is important for us in landscapes. When I see a plant with a very limited distribution like this, it usually means it wants, when you put it in your garden, it wants to be treated how it was treated in its home, which is really easy here in Southern California to treat a white sage like its home because this is its home. So just to give you guys an example, there's one plant called black sage that is probably, in my opinion, the easiest to grow sage in all of California. So where most of the population of California lives, black sage is probably the easiest to grow. It loves shade, it can tolerate full sun, it can tolerate being on a drip system, it can tolerate overhead watering. And there's another sage that is one of the hardest sages I've ever tried to grow, and I don't think I've kept it alive for more than 2 years, and that's Death Valley sage, Salvia funerea. It's a beautiful plant, but it grows in a very limited area. And so hopefully you guys can figure out which one is which. This is Death Valley sage over here. If you guys look on the right where my cursor is, and we know I've never seen this plant native nature. I've grown this plant from seed. It's a beautiful plant, and it needs to grow basically in gravel. If it rains too much on flat clay soil, it might freak out and die because it's cold and clay wet, which it never gets in its native habitat. And over here, Salvia mellifera, if it rains 25 inches during the winter, this guy doesn't care. It loves it. If you have a drip system on that waters every 4 or 5 days, it doesn't matter. This guy loves it. This plant is very, very adaptable. I've seen it under oak trees. I've seen it in full sun, past or in the Inland Empire. It tolerates so much. And it makes sense because look at how wide this distribution is. This is like someone who grew up in Oxnard, who grew up in Beverly Hills, who knows Irvine, then had a tia up in San Jose, and the primos used to take them out tagging at night. And then they lived in Napa Valley and had an uncle that had a winery, and so it knew how to live. When you have that many experiences in life, you're usually a really adaptable person. You can handle a lot. I love to compare plants to people, and black sage is super adaptable because of where the genetics come from. And Death Valley sage is super hard to grow. If you can find a nursery that can grow that for you, you should go to that nursery and buy everything from them because that's an amazing nursery. Epilobium canum. This is California fuchsia. You can see the distribution. And a lot of times we don't find any distribution in here, which is the Central Valley, because all it is broccoli and almonds. It's not really broccoli and almonds, but most of the native stuff is just destroyed. It's gone here. But you can see this distribution, and we know this in our landscapes. We can use California fuchsia in Baja and San Diego. We can use full sun. We can use it along the coast, getting coastal fog in Oxnard. We can use it in Sacramento. It's one of the UC Davis all-stars that can tolerate over 100 degrees, clay soil, etc. And look at Epilobium septentrionale. I love this plant. This is a gorgeous plant. Oh my chicles, this plant is so hard to grow. If you grow it in flat clay soil, if you can keep it alive for more than 2 years in the ground in Southern California, you are a really good gardener. This guy wants to be in upper elevation. It wants to have 80 degrees, 85 degrees at the most. It wants to be growing in granite. When it rains, it wants the water to wash right off. It wants to be cold during the winter, but not soggy wet like we are in Southern California. It's just a whole different lifestyle, right? That's what that plant remembers. And it's really hard to recreate that in Southern California unless you have a pot. It's really easy in or in raised beds or in pots in rock gardens or with dahlias or other cool things like monkey flowers. Really easy to control that. So let's get to the list. And as I get to the list, I'm gonna check in with my homegirl, Celeste. And vamos a ver, Celeste, do we have any questions that we might want to address right now, or should I just rip right into this list?
Well, there's one that I think is really interesting that came up about the impact of the changing climate on native plants.
Mhm.
Do you think that native plants are going to need to be watered more frequently because there is less rain?
That's a great question. So, as you guys know, I'm a PhD from Berkeley. I studied, I've never even taken a plant class, but I am lucky enough to have worked around and I call it blessed when people either they impart their knowledge on purpose or I just get to listen to them. I've worked around a lot of great native plant people. Some passed away, unfortunately, and some who are still with us. Some that continue to do amazing work. So if you look at this distribution. This is super important. Whoever asked that question, I'm going to try to answer your question the best I can. A lot of the distribution is north and south. And what happens here in Baja, San Diego, Oceanside, Irvine, is that if you guys should look, it's fascinating. The history that we have, the European history we have of rainfall records is 12 to 15 inches a year. Sometimes we get 3 inches, sometimes we get 25. It's amazing to see how different. But basically, you can cut Southern California, and if someone knows more than me, fine. But you can cut Southern California off right about Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. That's where the rain starts to change. There are parts of San Luis Obispo that are way drier than here, but for the most part, we start to see walls of 20 to way more than 20 inches of rain a year. And so we know just from history that a lot of times the plants have changed going this way, right? So you can see white sage, and I'll just go back to white sage so you can see it. You can see white sage and here, and something that loves water more, like black sage, goes up to here. And so we see this distribution happen really cool. I give a native food talk. One of my favorite native foods to grow is Vaccinium ovatum, which is huckleberry. And if you imagine Oregon is here, where my cursor is, then Washington and British Columbia, Vaccinium ovatum occurs up in British Columbia through Washington. It's beautiful, the occurrence, down into Oregon, and then it jumps to the coast over here of California, and it occurs in a lot of places out here. And then it starts to die off really fast, and it's only right along the coast. We see it on the Channel Islands. Doesn't occur anywhere else in Ventura County. It occurs in like a few spots in Santa Barbara, then it jumps LA, Orange County, and then it occurs in a few spots in San Diego County. And so what we're seeing there is we know that people go huckleberry picking in Oregon and Washington and British Columbia. It's a freaking weed out there. But down here, where there's a lot less water, it can be a lot more intense desert. We see the change, right? So a lot of times, historically, we see the north to south. But with climate change, we're going to see more of this, which is a perfect question for. Did I plant that person? So whoever asked that question, thank you. Here's $10 for asking that question. I think a lot of the changes we're going to see are going to be east west. And so we're going to see, so this is a weird distribution. So this is a coastal to enter basically to Vegas distribution. So I've seen bladderpod. So this is bladderpod next to creosote bush. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. I'm from El Chuco. I love the smell of creosote when it rains. During the summer, when the chubascos come, when those monsoons come, you could smell the desert, and I love that smell. This is bladderpod growing next to creosote bush in sandy soil in the desert. I've seen bladderpod next to the ocean, almost getting salt spray. It's that close, within a soccer field of the ocean by Point Magoo. So this plant, you're telling me, grows natively next to the ocean with fog half the year, and then next to creosote bush over 100 degrees. And so I think going forward, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see plants creep inward. We're going to see them creep upward. We're going to see them creep up hills. We're already seeing that. But for us in the landscapes, what we're seeing is, and I'm gonna steal something from my friend Rick, not Rick, Rick Rubin, Greg Rubin, um, who was one of the first people to get me to do a few things, but I've learned a lot from Greg Rubin. Greg Rubin has installed over 600 native plant gardens in San Diego area. If you guys can only buy one native plant book, I would buy Greg Rubin's book. It's worth every stupid dollar you'll spend on it. He's an amazing author. He has a great website as well. But what Greg is starting to do in some of his landscapes down in San Diego is we used to just tell everyone water twice a month for most of your native gardens. Water the 1st and the 15th, or water the 15th and the 30th. That's when you water during the summer. So during the dry season, April to October, you want to keep your plants lightly hydrated. And what Rick is, why do I have Rick Rubin? So what Greg Rubin is doing is he's saying he's starting to switch, and he's starting to see that the plants don't necessarily need more water, but they need it more often. So let's say you have a landscape that requires 300 gallons of water during a month during the summer, let's say in June, and you would water for half an hour with pop-up sprinklers every 2 weeks, right? So that would you'd give 150 gallons on the 15th and 150 gallons on the 30th. Now what Rick is saying, what Craig is saying is he's watering every 10 days. And this is not, every garden, but this is what he started to do. And instead of watering for 30 minutes, he might be watering for 20 minutes every 10 days. So he's starting to give his plants a little bit, not more water, but giving them more often. And the way I think about it is, imagine you guys ever been in like Disneyland waiting for like a ride, and you're like in the hot sun, and then the little mist system comes up, right? And it feels good, but you don't want that mist system to shower you, right? You don't want a shower while you're waiting in line. That mist feels really good. And so basically how we water during the summer is a light rain. We're not trying to get the soil really wet. We're actually just trying to hydrate our plants. And so we're starting to go more often on hydrating our plants, but not necessarily more water yet. We haven't seen that we're using more water yet, if that makes sense. That was a horrible answer to that question. Any other questions, Celeste?
Yeah, I think just one clarifying question about the hands-on class that you mentioned that's coming up in January. Is that one already posted on the Eventbrite, and what was the date for that again?
No, it's not posted on Eventbrite, and it is January. What week is ours? It's January 29th. I said the wrong day, huh?
Ours is the 19th.
Yeah, so ours will be January 29th, so the weekend after our online one.
Okay, and folks can look for it on Eventbrite.
It'll be on
soon?
Eventbrite. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully soon.
Okay,
Cool.
cool. Well,
So,
let's get into more of the training. We'll have more time for questions.
okay, cool. So I remember the first time I started doing native plants. I'm not gonna say who was doing the talk, but they were saying, in the fall, I love the rust and the cinnamon colors of some of our plants. And me and my primo that were in the class, we were just like, rust and cinnamon, that's a really poetic way of saying brown. Like, aren't these plants just brown during the winter, during the fall? And I think part of it is people trying to, make something sound pretty. I Ain't nobody ever called me cinnamon or rust colored, right? People would call me brown my whole life. No one's ever called me rust or cinnamon. But people get really descriptive with these brown colors on native plants. But I will admit that some of these are very, very pretty when they're brown. Let's admit they're not brown, or they're not cinnamon or rust, or maybe for an artist they are, but they're brown. When they're dry, they can be very, very pretty. But what I want to hit you guys with mostly today is flowers. Most of us think of flowers when we think of winter color. And so I want to give you guys some flowers. I'll hit a few of the dry. So I'm talking about live flowers. I'll talk about some of the dry flowers and some fruits and some structural stuff that might be cool. Um, so bladderpod. Why are we not using more bladderpod? Why? Stop not using bladderpod. This plant is a beast. Like I told you guys, it occurs along the coast. It occurs inland. As I told you guys, we have that free program where we're giving away plants to the public. I personally made it one of my missions in life to get more bladderpod into landscapes all across Southern California. We have over 500 of them to give away right now. This plant gets 3 to about 6 feet tall, and it has this beautiful round shape to it, and it gets about 3 to 6 feet wide. It's part of the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list. So one thing I like to do in my classes is I know I cannot give you everything in my class, but I would love to give you something, and maybe you guys can go later on and learn from something I've given you. If you guys don't know about the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star program, I would encourage you all to check it out. If you find my talk boring, which I don't, I don't blame if you do, you can go find it right now. It's a list of 100 plants. There's probably only 20 or 30 that are native. So they had to be non-invasive. They had to be low water. They had to tolerate clay soil. They had to tolerate 100 degrees in the Sacramento Valley, and they have to look good 3 out of 4 seasons at least. And it's a great program. And Bladderpod, they have some really good plant people because they pick Bladderpod, and Bladderpod is not a very popular native plant, unfortunately. I think the reason it's not popular is because it has a smell, but it only has a smell if you touch it. I don't know many people who live in their plants unless, God forbid, you're homeless. And I really hope that you become unhomeless quickly. But most people will never smell bladderpod unless they touch it. And so, a plant that has these lime green, gray leaves has these tubular flowers that hummingbirds love during the winter. It has these really easy to collect dry seeds, or it has these wet seeds before they dry that folks use as capers. It's related to the caper plant for the Mediterranean. I think this plant is so easy. Without water, I've seen it flower for 4 or 5 months. With water, I've seen it flower almost all year. If someone forced me to pick 3 plants that could flower, if I only had 3 plants to do a native plant garden with, and they put a gun to my head, God forbid, and they said, with these 3 plants, you need to have flowers all year, this would be one of the plants. I don't know why people don't use it more. It's easy to grow. It tolerates clay soil, tolerates 100+ degrees. Look at it next to creosote bush. Stop. Just please, por favor, use this plant. I love it. There's almost no negatives with it, besides the smell. And I think it smells like ruda, a plant that a lot of Latinx folks grew up with. And most of us are used to rue, and it smells medicinal, just like rue. So anyways, it combines really well with shiny, leaf ceanothus, which I'll show you guys a few of those, and the blue purple flowers. Then you have Laker colors. You have gold and purple and gold of the old LA Kings colors, Lakers colors. What more could you want? So Salvia piana. No, I'm not recommending white sage for flowering during the winter. I don't think I've ever seen it flower during the winter. Maybe if it was a year old. But usually what it has in the winter, better than most other sages, is it has these fat leaves. White sage has this really cool tendency to hold on to its leaves better than most other sages. And so what I'm getting at is this is what I use and that we're going to use. And Celeste, this plant, this class is up on the website. We're going to offer next Saturday a free class to the public where we show you how to decorate with native plants, do holiday or what we want to call winter decorations with native plants. So white sage is one of the plants that we decorate with. It would be a little hard to decorate with like black sage, purple sage, a few of those other sages without a Cleveland sage without having them been hydrated in your garden. But white sage, for whatever reason, holds on to its fatter leaves better than most of the sages, so it's easier to decorate. But it is a really, really cool plant to grow as well. I love plants that you don't have to have in flower for them to look good. This is a plant that people like sometimes more when they're not flowering than when they are flowering. When they're flowering, they have these tall flowers that some people like, some people don't. They attract bees. These will not flower till about March or April, then into early summer. But what I'm looking for is winter. This winter color is a bright white gray. It's really perfect for those shady, kind of foggy um, winter mornings. The thing you want to know about white sage is that it will be dead in 2 or 3 years if you keep a drip system on it and you don't ever move the emitters. A real quick tip, this is in my maintenance class, not in this class, but when you guys grow stuff on drip, native plants can be grown on drip, no problem. But a drip system delivers the water right to the plant. And we want to stop watering our plant after the first year. And we want to start watering the root area or the area where the entire plant is at. So you want to move those emitters if you can 12 to 24 inches away from the neck of the plant. That's usually where people put. If you can do that, your white sage will usually be really, really happy. And this is treating the plant like ishi and watering it every 2 weeks because that's what the plant would really, really like. So that white sage, those stems we use in our native winter decoration bundles. Another plant that we'll use is Toyon. Oh, I love Toyon. So here's the distribution. And from this distribution, I could probably guess, and 95% of the time I would be right, that a plant that is this widely available or in native nature that grows in this many different habitats is easy to grow almost everywhere in Southern California. I've seen it along the coast, in foggy areas in Oxnard and Camarillo, Ventura. I've seen it in the Inland Empire being cut to a 6 inch like statue, or I'm sorry, not 6 inch statue, a 6 foot statue. So about as tall as a lot of males. So 6 feet tall and not very wide. It's almost like a pillar. But this plant wants to in native nature get from about 12 to about 30, maybe 35 feet tall. I've seen them get huge. Here's another beautiful clipping. This is a photo from CalFlora where I used to work at in Northern California. So Toyon is on the UC Davis All-Star list. Um, most of its growth, I think where most people will see it, is 6 to 20 feet tall. You can cut it into a multi-trunk tree. It's not strong enough. The trunks are strong enough to where you want like your kids, especially if they ate too much Thanksgiving dinner. You don't really want your kids climbing on top of this tree. These trunks are not the strongest, but it does love full sun to part shade. In almost all parts of Southern California, the berries are eaten by birds. They're eaten by humans as well. Native folks all across California have eaten this for generations. And I love using this berry as food and as a decoration. And it's true, this berry does have a little poison in it. I believe it's cyanide, but it's some of these. So whenever you guys hear something like that about like native food or stuff, you should take them seriously. But you would have to eat a huge amount of this berry. And trust me, this berry is not that good where you're eating a huge amount of it. The way I use this berry is in plain yogurt, and then I add my hummingbird sage, agave syrup, or a hummingbird sage honey into it because this berry, if I go back to it, is a little it's a little pithy. It's a little like I don't know, spongy or and it's not the sweetest. Even when you catch them sweet, they're not super super sweet. But it mixes really well. The yogurt kind of blunts it, and then the hummingbird sage honey that I show you how to make in our native food class adds a really good kind of native like tropical kick to it. So it makes it edible. So a lot of native folks used to, and some of them still do, dry this, and we'll add it to like granola, or to like dried fruit mixes or whatnot. But just a really cool plant to have in your house. Supposedly Hollywood was named after this plant, and it seeds and it fruits right now. And so this is the perfect time. When I used to have Nopalito Native Plant Nursery, we were struggling and we would do everything to make as much money as we could, open 7 days a week on the 118 freeway. I'm sorry, the 126 going to Santa Paula and Fillmore. There's dozens and dozens of these plants planted, and they used to illegally park my van, open the back, and just cut a bunch of these from the freeway and use them as decorations. And if you ever visit us, I may have sold you some illegally cut Toyon. Please don't do that, it's super dangerous. But that's how we do it when we need to grind. So we use white sage. So imagine you have a white sage bundle. It's a really pretty bright gray, kind of chalky gray. And then you have your Toyon berry as your red, kind of your holly color. And then we can grab some California buckwheat. We can grab these. Most of them won't be white anymore. They'll be brown and kind of what do they call it? Cinnamon and rust color, but they will be that color. And so this is why California buckwheat is so easy to grow. It's almost as easy to grow as rosemary. You see the distribution, right? It goes down into Baja, all the way across into Vegas, basically up into Bakersfield, really wide distribution. I love this plant. Consider it basically as big as you've ever seen a rosemary kit. You may think of California buckwheat as that rosemary. Again, it's not going to flower during the winter. It flowers during the summer, maybe early fall, but they have dry flowers on them during the winter, and they turn that really cool brown cinnamon rust color, and we use them in our decorations. They're great, and we have so many different California buckwheats. There's over 100 different species of Eriogonum or buckwheats in California that you have a lot to choose from. You don't just have to use California buckwheat. This is probably the easiest one to grow. So this one usually gets about 2 to 4 feet high. Full sun for almost all of the buckwheats is best, and it's a really good pollinator plant during the summer, but it makes a good cut flower, especially, or dry cut flower during the winter for your holiday decoration. And this plant, I put this note right here, carne asada. So I want people say, like, especially like we'll call them Latinx or non-Mexicanos, they're like, oh yeah, I love that place, has really good tacos, has really good carne asada. I'm all cool. But I want to know, did you have some lengua? Did you have some sesos? Did you get tripas? Did you get into the hardcore meats? Did you get some of those tacos? And to me, a good native plant gardener has gotten past carne asada. Carne asada is just basically Galvezes, Preciosos, Island Snapdragon, it's Yankee Point. Everyone has that. Even non-native people have those. But I want to know, are you really a native plant person? And you are when you try buckwheats, because buckwheats don't have the shiny leaves that cenotes have. They don't have the sexy trunks that manzanitas have. Buckwheats are distinctly California. They have this very California look to them. And so it's like trying brain tacos. You're getting in to the meat. And for those of you who are vegan and vegetarian, I'm sorry, because this is nasty, but it's like trying the leftovers of the soy. Like, you are getting into some hardcore, but this is what California is. This is how our California gardens are going to probably look in the future. So let me go past this because that's incorrect right there. So another one is Conejo Buckwheat. And Conejo Buckwheat only occurs in a very few spots. I'm lucky enough to work probably about 3 miles away from where it occurs. It only occurs in basically 2 cities in the whole world. It's always almost like in volcanic rock, growing sideways. Really cool plant. And whenever you see it at a nursery, no disrespect to Theodore Payne, but you'll see it like a Theodore Payne says, like, won't tolerate clay soil or needs good draining soil. And I would argue that that's completely incorrect. Most of our plants don't mind clay soil. What they hate is wet clay soil. And you get wet clay soils 2 ways, usually. One is by putting a drip system on it, and you won't stop watering it. And you just keep watering every 2 days, and you develop this wet foot. Imagine you stick your foot in water every 20 minutes. Your foot will never get a chance to dry out. What if you stuck your foot in water every 3 days? Your foot would probably dry out. And so our plants don't mind clay soil. They actually love clay soil, most of them. I've seen this plant grow beautifully in clay soil. what they hate is wet clay soil. The other easy way to get wet clay soil besides drip is in the winter when we get too much rain. And that happens every 5 to 10 years. We'll get a really wet, cold winter when we get a whole bunch of big storms right on top of each other, and it's cold and it doesn't get to dry out. And it's very common to lose desert plants that way, and some of these plants that like dry clay soils. Apart from that, I think it's a complete myth, and I think a lot of our nurseries, unfortunately, are doing us a disservice by saying it doesn't work well in clay soil or it needs a well draining clay soil. I think what they should put is, hey, stupid, stop watering your clay soil so much, because clay soil is amazing, but it doesn't want to be wet for most of our native plants. Anyways, these guys are great because you can cut them when they're yellow during the summer and they'll stay that color, or you can let them dry up and in the winter you can use them for your decorations, for your holiday decorations. They're beautiful. That's such a cool color. That contrast is amazing. And here you can see the distribution. And we know it in our gardens, it can be hard to grow if we put it in flat clay soil, because this guy is used to volcanic rock and used to growing sideways. And if it ever gets wet, the water washes right off. This is not black sage that is used to up the coast, Santa Cruz, right here, right? This remembers volcanic rock in Ventura County, and it wants to be treated as such in your garden. So now that we have our white sage bundle, we have a beautiful red Toyon berry, and we have some cool, what are we calling it, rust and cinnamon buckwheat flowers. We can put that all together on some of the backbone we can connect it to would be our grape species. We have two different grape species in California, Vitis californica and Vitis juridiana. You can see the species right here. They're both really good. I've tried both the fruits on both of them. They're both good. I wouldn't say they're amazing, but there is one called Rogers Red, which happens to be a hybrid of Vitis californica. It's a California wild grape, and a wine grape from Sonoma County got together one night. They had babies, and Rogers Red is what came out. And Rogers Red is gorgeous. It's half California, half European wine grape. And this grows 10 to 20 feet a year, but you don't have to let it get 50 feet. Like all of our vineyards, you can cut them back. You can cut wine grapes back January, February, March, right back to basically a stump 2 or 3 feet tall. So if you take, this may be just one grape, you can take this whole grape trellis, cut it back down to here, and then all of these stems we can use for wreaths, and we do use for wreaths. So if you guys come to our class next Saturday, 11:30 to 1:30, it's online right now. We'll be using Vitis Rogers Red as our background for our holiday decorations, and we'll be using Toyon berries, we'll be using white sage, and we'll be using buckwheats as the main attractions for those. But this looks beautiful during the winter, and I'm calling winter November to February. It's a very, very weird definition of winter, but November to February, this guy will start to go dormant. So November and December is when you'll see these leaves start to change this beautiful color on Rogers Red Grape, and then all leaves will fall and they'll be naked, and then you can cut all these stems back and hang out with them. They do produce really good fruit. I love the fruit of Rogers Red. It does have a lot of seeds, so for some people who are picky about seeds, then you probably wouldn't like it. But apart from that, within 2 or 3 years, it can produce fruit. The birds like the fruit, so it might be too much fruit, and the birds might overwhelm them. But a really useful plant, and it's one of the few plants. This is really cool, and this is not a typo. This might look like a typo. It's one of the few plants that I can honestly say can tolerate full sun to full shade. I'm talking fern shade. So it doesn't produce fruit when it's in full shade. It doesn't produce fruit. It needs more sun to flower. But it does grow like a really kind of informal ground cover in like under oak trees in full shade. A really cool plant. And so I have this list of 15 tips that I like to go over. I'm going to go over it at the end if we have time, but it is a list of tips that I wish that I knew and I followed when I first started. Some of them I knew, I was just too stupid to follow, and some of them I've picked up as I've gone along. But if you guys can follow most of these tips, which I go over in my maintenance class, then you're good. I think maybe one of the ones I love to use the most is to fertilize. And how I fertilize is I copy what olive orchards do, what some really good low water or dry farm grape vineyards do, and what some Southern California lavender farms do. And if you think about those three plants, olives, grapes, lavender, they're either native to California, some of the grapes are, right? Or they're from Mediterranean parts of the world, very similar to California. And so these folks are trying to make a living growing the crops from these plants. And a lot of these really sustainable farms are only using compost. And compost, most people wouldn't even consider a fertilizer, but they're using compost at a very specific time to reward, to thank, to feed these plants that are giving them extra. Lavender in the Mediterranean flowers. It flowers once, the flowers dry, the plant goes semi-dormant, almost like a sage. I consider Mediterranean lavenders basically California sages, except for the annuals and hummingbird sage. So we want to treat our native sages just like lavender farms treat their lavenders. They cut them back at a specific time during the winter and they side dress them with compost. And we see the rewards in some of these beautiful lavender farms. The same thing with olive orchards and the same thing with grape vineyards. So I go over these tips more in depth during my maintenance class, but I do disagree with people when they say you shouldn't fertilize native plants, but I do agree with people when they say you shouldn't fertilize native plants. I think this is a very specific type of native plant that you fertilize. And to me, it's the athlete. It's the one that you ask to do more of. It's the one that you water more. It's the one that you get more food from, or I'm sorry, or more food from, or that you get more flowers from, the ones that you cut back every year. And those are the lavenders or the sages, some of the penstemon, some of the seaside daisies, some of the monkey flowers, the blue-eyed grasses, etc. I go into that, a lot more in that maintenance class. And here's a quick list of some resources. I'll get to some more plants right now, but here's that UC Davis all-star list that I love. Las Pilitas Nursery, started by Bert Wilson and his family. Rest in peace, Bert is amazing, great resource. Tree of Life has some great videos on their website. This would be the only book that I would buy if you only had enough money to buy one book. I would buy one of Greg Rubin's books or check out his website. And to me personally, that San Marcos Growers website, for not just native plants, but for plants in general is phenomenal. And I've heard that this band is really bad at native plant music, and you may want to check them out if you're on Instagram. There's my email. Again, you guys, I will email this presentation to Celeste, so you guys don't have to write all these down. So let's talk about stuff that might not go in the wreath, but will just brighten up your garden. So these are manzanitas. I love the manzanitas. I don't know exactly, there's maybe 50 or 60 species in California. This is Howard McMinn manzanita. There's a white sage right here. There's a photo from Bob Perry. This is the ground cover Carmel Sur manzanita. Manzanitas come in all shapes and sizes. This is probably my favorite. I love manzanitas. I consider them like wine. I used to work at Olive Garden. I don't think I'd ever had wine before. Maybe in the Marines when I was just drunk, just drinking stuff, but I had never cared about wine. I just drank it. And they showed me how to kind of care a little bit about Cabernet and Merlot and Chianti and all this crap. And I consider manzanitas the wines of California landscaping. To a lot of people, they might look the exact same. Some people might not see the difference between this cursor right here and this plant right here. And I'm gonna go forward and this plant right here. They might say, oh, they're all manzanitas, all the same. And a lot of them are. They're not super distinct. But as you start to learn manzanitas, they have these small differences sometimes that are just amazing. To me, pajaroensis is probably the prettiest. It has this new growth that is kind of pinkish, a little bit orange, definitely green, but it has this blush of orange and pink. And then the flowers are distinctly pink on these. So you can get ground covers that are about 6 to 12 inches tall, and you can go up to more like shrubs, like 4 to 6 feet tall. And then you can get some true trees that are 10 feet to 15 feet tall. Manzanitas have the reputation of being hard to grow, and it is correct. They are hard to grow if you are not treating them like ishi. But if you treat them like ishi, about half of the manzanitas on the market are easy to grow, and the other half can be very hard. Some of the island stuff can be hard. Some of the Northern California stuff, like emerald carpet, can be hard. And it makes sense because they're from a different spot in California like us, or they're from very distinct regions. The ones that are easier to grow are usually the hybrids, like Howard McMinn, or the ones that are from areas just like yours or that occur in large parts of California, which some of the manzanitas don't. But they do flower in winter. I already saw my first few manzanitas flowering, which is beautiful. They usually flower strong December, January, and February. Really good for hummingbirds, bees, and other pollinators. I love to eat the flowers. They taste like they have a hint of honey in them. Once the flowers are done in the spring, if you have a big enough manzanita, they'll produce fruit that you can use to make manzanita cider. I wouldn't necessarily use the manzanita as a decoration for the winter because the flowers are delicate and they fall off, but it does make a beautiful color spot in your garden. And I would say if you had to go with one, this is so easy. I should pick a harder one. But Howard McMahon manzanita is the easiest to find, probably the easiest to grow of the larger manzanitas. It's very reliable. It's a really pretty plant. And monkey flowers. Monkey flowers are some of the hardest plants we have to grow. So why would I recommend them for you? They are hard to grow in the ground. They're really easy to grow in pots because we can dictate what's happening in a pot. Here's the thing you guys want to remember if you're doing native plants in a pot. It's kind of like a horse. If you guys have a horse in a stable, you have to feed that horse food. You have to water that horse. That horse is not wild anymore. But if you were to let that horse go and conditions are right, that horse could probably survive in native nature. So we have a captive horse when you do container gardening. You're always going to have to fertilize that plant and you're always going to have to provide the right amount of water for that plant. But if you can do that, some of our plants reward you much better than they do in the ground. And monkey flowers, in my experience, has been one of those. They can live for years in the pot, where sometimes they die the first year or two in the ground. They can flower for months in a pot, where sometimes they might only flower for 2 or 3 months in the ground. So I would recommend in a pot, if you unless you have like full sun, like in Riverside, they can tolerate full sun to part shade almost anywhere in Southern California. Anywhere where it's 100 degrees for days on end, probably want to do part shade. But other than that, they don't mind that full sun to part shade. And this Fiesta Marigold, which is a new one, about 6 or 7 years old, that's such a pretty plant. So in a garden, in the ground, really reliable for long flowers. During the winter, the ceanothus, it's kind of like a torch. The manzanitas flower December, January. And right as the manzanitas start to end, they pass the torch to our beautiful ceanothus or what are they called? California lilac. This is probably my favorite and one of the earliest flowers. It's early enough for me to say that it's a winter flower. I've seen this guy flower as early as January, usually late January to early February. This is a newer plant. This is Ceanothus maritimus. It's a really rare plant too. It only occurs kind of by the Hearst Castle area in the San Luis Obispo County. And this is a new cultivar, so it's only about maybe 10 years old on that UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list, tolerant of clay soil, and it's a small plant for a ceanothus. Some ceanothus get huge. This guy only gets about 3 feet tall, maybe about 5 feet wide. And when it flowers, it is that thing is covered. You might not even be able to see the plant no more. It's just full of flowers. Really good for bees and other pollinators that love ceanothus. If you guys want to have fun, well, I guess this is how lame my life is. This is my idea of fun. Going to a ceanothus that's flowering, close your eyes and move away about 10, 15 feet and see if you can hear the ceanothus. You can hear the wildlife. You can hear the pollinators just going to town on that plant. Really useful plant in our fall landscape. This is deergrass. These flowers are dry, so I'm not trying to pretend that this is the prettiest flower, but these stems are vertical, so they're upright, and they do offer like an accent in the garden. And deergrass is really easy to find. It could be really cheap. We're giving it away at our nursery for free. It is on the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list, and I think it's a very useful plant in landscapes. If you guys want to see how boring landscapes can be sometimes, just drive down the 101 corridor from like Thousand Oaks into Calabasas, and you could see Caltrans get really lazy and just overuse deergrass, like thousands of them just in a row. It's really easy to grow, really easy to maintain, tolerates part shade to full sun, even in almost desert areas. I know Mountain States Wholesale Nursery in Phoenix or by Phoenix grows this and sells this. So a very tolerant plant of so much. And you can use these stems to decorate if you want during the winter. They're very useful for decorations, not necessarily in that white sage, Toyon mix, but in other mixes, they look good in like kind of like dry upright grass mixes. Hummingbird sage, this is one of my favorites because it starts flowering usually in December, sometimes in November, but let's call it December. And with maintenance, so it's water. So like Greg Rubin's tactic of watering every 10 days. So keeping it hydrated. And then deadheading, which is removing the dry flowers as they dry off. I can get this to flower 6 months out of the year. So December to June, we should be able to have this plant flower. The rest of the time, it has these leaves, especially if you're keeping it moist. Water every 10 days. It has these leaves that you can use for hummingbird sage honey. You can use for tea. You can even fry the leaves. The leaves are really good fried. And you can see this distribution. It doesn't look like it's a very wide distribution, but it is for one of our sages. And what's interesting to note here is that hummingbird sage doesn't grow well in full sun. This is in Claremont, so this is at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. And under an oak tree, it loves it in the Inland Empire. But in full sun in the Inland Empire, it just can't handle it. In Oxnard, in coastal areas, Malibu, it can handle full sun. Needs a little bit more water, but it can tolerate it for sure. Where it's really good at is in part shade, almost all across Southern California. And that's kind of shows it here, right? It doesn't really creep away from the coast. I mean, there's parts, these dots, there's parts where it occurs in 100-degree weather in Ojai. But for the most part, it's a part shade plant on the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list. It's a huge plant for hummingbirds. These guys love this plant. Super recommended plant. If you guys could only start with 5 native plants in your garden, I would start with this as one of them because you can interact with this plant. You can cook with it. You can do cut flowers with it. The hummingbirds will visit it right away. It's a really cool plant that way. California fuchsia. This is a plant that I don't recommend for the winter. The only reason I put it here is to remind me to have you guys sign up for the winter maintenance class because I have a video online about how to maintain this plant because this is not a plant that you want to look at for the most part during the winter. It is beat up. It's like a night. It's like after a night of clubbing or like how folks look like after they run a marathon. No me gusta in December. But if you cut it back this time of year, it looks amazing during the summer. So that's part of our winter maintenance class. A few other ones that I really like, especially for food, probably my #1 native food plant would be the Ribes aureum or the golden currant. I like this one because it's also on the UC Davis All-Star list. The first native food I ever ate when I used to work at CalFlora Nursery up north. What I recommend for these is they're almost like blueberries. If you guys ever grown blueberry, you maybe bought one at the store and it had a bunch of fruit and you took it home, you ate all the fruit, cool. And then the thing almost never fruited or didn't produce that much fruit anymore. What we know about blueberries is they like to be around friends. They like to have other plants that they can cross-pollinate with. I found the same thing with currants. If you only have one currant, you don't get that much fruit. So I want to recommend at least 3 of these golden currants if you guys are looking for fruit. I already saw these guys start to flower last week, which is really pretty. Usually they don't flower till about December and the fruit comes around April or May, but it's a big winter flower. This is the fruit. And then this is Ribes malvaceum. This is our chaparral currant that you find in the Santa Monica's. And this guy will start flowering December, maybe January. And it's a big one again for hummingbirds. Such a pretty plant. This fruit is not as good. This one I can give to almost anyone who wants to have an open mind. And almost everyone will agree that this is a really good fruit to eat. Verbena lilacina delamina. Remember earlier when I said it, unfortunately, if someone put a gun to my head and tried to get me to produce a 12-month out of the year flowering native garden, this would be a second plant that I would pick. This plant's really easy to grow, about 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, like a little ball. It blooms so much of the year. It does best in full sun, but I've seen it do okay in part shade. Once it gets too shady, it starts to stretch out. But this is a great one for pollinators. And since it flowers almost all year, you can attract moths and butterflies almost all year with this bad boy. Really easy to find plant. You can find this at Home Depot sometimes. I'm not recommending Home Depot, but that's how easy it is to flower or to find. Some other ones that I like include giant coreopsis. I've seen this guy flowering on Christmas Day. Usually this January is when it starts to really start to kick off. Such a really pretty plant, big landing pad for butterflies and moths. This is Encilia californica or California sunflower. This is another great plant that you can usually start to see just go full flower in January. Big difference between a plant. This is a funky Dr. Seuss looking plant that goes full dormant during the summer. And this is more of a shrub looking plant that usually goes part dormant during the summer, especially with a little water. You can keep it a little bit nicer. One plant that I hate, I think it's okay to hate. If we're talking about these plants like people, there's some of my family that I personally don't like. I love my family, but this Western redbud I hate in Southern California. I think I've seen it be too inconsistent. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes they don't grow for like 3 or 4 years. They just stay there. I don't like this plant. If you're gonna have a little bit of water and a little bit of kind of like lighter soil, this plant can do well, and it's flowering right now. Other than that, I would stay away from this plant. I would use something else like a ceanothus or like a California buckeye or something. But they do flower early December, January, February. And then this is deerweed, which some people consider the best pollinator plant for late winter. So January, February, March. This guy attracts so many things in our coastal sage scrub. Just a really great plant for pollinators. And then two of my favorites. I used to work at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Some of you guys have been there. There's a hedge that's over 50 years old. It's about 3.5 feet tall. It's made of lemonade berry. So if you guys look at this picture, there's the flower that's open, and here's the buds that aren't open. This is in January. If you guys go back a month, most of these buds aren't open, but they have these pretty colors, and these are great for wreaths or holiday decorations. These are perfect for using in holiday decorations. So if we have them around, we'll use them as well for holiday decorations. They produce their fruit in spring and summer. Lemonade berry and sugar bush are basically the same plant, unless you're a botanist or hardcore native plant. No, that's completely incorrect. But sugar bush, if you live in hotter areas, is tolerant of super, super hot. I've heard they use it up in Phoenix as well. So this guy can tolerate a ton of heat. Lemonade berry is not as heat tolerant, but still very good in almost all parts of Southern California. If you live like in Riverside, I would use sugar bush. If you live in Malibu, downtown LA, you can use either. And then barberries. A lot of the barberries that you'll find at nurseries flower very, very early, December, January, February. This is Berberis navinii, which is personally one of my favorite native foods. I love eating this food, and it's just such a useful landscape plant as well. And so you'll find this guy in flower in December, January, and February. And there's a few other plants that we find just kind of splashing with color all year long. So you notice Yankee Point sometimes you'll find with some flowers just randomly throughout the year. Island Snapdragon is the third of the plants that I would have on my list for flower all year. So if someone made me do only 3 plants and have a flower every day of the year, it would be Bladderpod, Island Snapdragon, Verbena delamina, and I could guarantee that there would be a flower all year round. This guy's super easy to grow, looks great in pots and like a wine barrel or like a big pot, kind of spills out like a little arch. Really good for hummingbirds. And then yarrow, I've even seen yarrow in gardens, not necessarily native nature, but in gardens flowering as early as January and February. It's really easy to grow. You can see the natural distribution of yarrow. And now we know why they grow it in Humboldt, why they grow in Sacramento, and why they grow it in Riverside. It's tolerant of all those spots. Really good cut flower too, and excellent for pollinators. And I hate to do this, but I like to be realistic. Most people aren't going to do all non-native stuff. So if you're going to do non-native, I'm sorry, most people aren't going to do all native stuff. So if you want to do some non-natives, I just want to encourage you guys to make sure you use low water and use stuff that is non-invasive, that doesn't weed and become a weed everywhere. So the aloes are going off right now. They look beautiful in winter gardens. Rosemary's best time for flowering is during the winter. And Tagetes lemonii, which is Copper Canyon daisy from I think parts of Arizona, but definitely northern Mexico, is going off right now as well. So here's a list of some plants to avoid if you're a beginner, because they can be hard because people overwater them. The dahlias, the irises, some of the monkey flowers, unless they're in a pot. There's a lot of, like I said, I'll give this whole list to Celeste. And I do go over all of these tips for maintenance, which I think is the most important part. Shopping for plants is easy, getting them into the ground is easy, but having them look good, pruning them correctly, how to make them flower longer, how to dial in your irrigation, I think is the hard part. And I have a free class in January about doing almost all of that. So I want to encourage you guys again, if you're interested in my native plant horticulture training, it's a free 7-week class. We just ask that you thank us by giving some um, volunteer hours at the park, either mostly in the nursery, helping us do propagation and growing plants. And we do have some free classes. We have a seed clean class tomorrow. We have the same seed clean class on Saturday. We have our native holiday decoration class next Saturday. Everything is available if you just Google Samuel Fund Eventbrite. Because I work alongside the national parks, all of this has to be offered for free. So I'm happy to offer it for free. We have a free plant program where I do offer some plants for free to the public as well. You guys feel free to email me, Antonio Sanchez at samuelfund.org, and I would love to try to help you guys out if I can. And with that, I think we're close to the end of the talk. And I want to check in with Celeste. Celeste,
Hey,
can I
you hear
wake
me?
you up? Mm-hmm.
I had to change machines because the one with the camera died. So that's me
That's
going back to the office and trying to
okay,
figure it
cool.
out. But I'm here and we have a lot of questions. Do you want to jump into taking some of those?
Let's do it. Let's do it. What time is
Cool.
it? 2:20. Oh, okay, cool. This is like the
Yeah.
first time I ever finished on time.
We have a few minutes to take some questions. There are some that are specific to certain plants. So we had one come in asking if the creosote bush can be grown in LA.
That's a great question. You know, I grew up with creosote bush, and I've grown creosote bush in a pot, but creosote bush in Southern California, in non-desert areas, I'm gonna call desert area, like maybe like Riverside, maybe parts of like San Diego, out going towards like the 8 freeway. It's been hard for me to grow. That's the one that I unfortunately don't have a lot of experience. I will always, I'm not gonna BS you, I don't have a lot of experience with that, except for growing in a pot, and it was really hard to grow in a pot. Our soil was too heavy, it got too cold. So I think it might be okay to grow in air. So that would be one I think that you would want to grow in really well draining soil, maybe even in a pot, and make sure it just gets as much heat as possible during the summer. Um, but I'm thinking of all the places I've been to. You know, I used to work at Rancho, I used to work at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. I think there might be a few at Rancho, but I don't think they looked amazing. Um, So I think that's one that you want to specifically tailor to the desert. Like, let's say you live in downtown LA, try to recreate the desert as much as you can in your garden. So try to use the hot heat of the wall, the reflected heat. So you may want to put it against the wall. You may want to mound it. So create like a 6-inch mound so that when you do water it, the roots don't sit there. Gravel, uh, mulch around the base of the plant, those types of things. That's a really good question.
And then speaking of pots, somebody asked that they have a manzanita in a pot and it looks sad and dried out. Is there any chance it might come back to life?
Yeah, so that's more of a maintenance issue. And so I'll give you the short and long term. The long term is if it's going to be in a pot, you want to fertilize your pots. It sounds like a lot, but you need to fertilize your pots every 3 months. So there's different types of fertilizers, but that's usually what we do in a pot is we fertilize them with these time release fertilizers every 3 months, and that keeps the plant growing. So that probably didn't happen, and then maybe they went dry. So manzanitas don't go dormant, so they don't drop their leaves. They don't go naked like a valley oak. They drop all their leaves and it's just stems. So if it's starting to drop its leaves, you might be in trouble. Let's say that you have 3 stems like this. If you guys look at my fingers, there's 3 stems, and one is dry and the other 2 are green. You can scratch, like if I were to cut myself or scratch, you could see flesh, right? Because I'm alive. You could scratch the stem and you could see green. So you want to scratch some of those stems and see if that plant is still alive. If that plant's still alive, then you want to give it liquid fertilizer. Liquid fertilizer is available to the plant right away. And so you want to give a diluted, like a 333, 555 type of fertilizer. If you go to a good nursery, or even, if someone knowledgeable at Lowe's or Home Depot, you can get a good low 333, 555 liquid fertilizer. And just when you water it, use half of what they recommend, because you don't want to shock the plant, but you do want to give the plant some nutrients. So if you can get it on this regimen of water, fertilizer every 3 months, you should be good. That's what nurseries do. We're always fertilizing and watering our plants, unfortunately. But I would use liquid fertilizer right away, because it sounds like it might be a little bit of an emergency.
And is there a specific type of fertilizer you recommend?
When I started Nopalito Native Plant Nursery, we wanted to do everything sustainable. We did compost tea, we did organic fertilizers. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, there's just not a good reliable liquid organic fertilizer. So the fertilizer to recommend would be like a Miracle Grow type fertilizer, which I hate doing, but they work, and sometimes we have to use them for emergencies like this. So yeah, it would be like there's like a Miracle Grow that you could find like at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's like a transplant. I forget the name of the that person emails me. I can give you the exact name and the exact ratio that we use for fertilizing.
Awesome. And then someone in the chat recommended Fox Farms Big Bloom. So maybe something to try.
Yeah, I've never used Fox Farms. Some of that stuff's really expensive, but it's a lot more sustainable. So there's that. We grow at the nursery that I work at. We grow 60,000 plants a year. So we just sacrifice a lot. It's kind of embarrassing, but you guys at home could probably do something a lot more. So yeah, if someone's used Fox Farms and they've had success with it, I might give more info than that if they haven't. But
cool. Well, we're running up to the half hour. There are a few questions that we didn't get to, but a lot of them have to do with maintenance questions. So perhaps they will be answered in our next training, which is coming up on January 19th. And I hope that folks will register for that, communitynatureconnection.org. And we'll see you in the new year for that one. And Antonio, any final thoughts to leave our participants with?
No, I want to thank you guys. If you guys enjoyed the class, please tell people about it. The whole point of the national parks working with CNC is to get this information out to as many people as possible. So, and if you guys can't make the maintenance class, I understand. If you have that question that didn't get answered, you can feel free to email me. Might take up to a week sometimes for me to respond to you, but you can hit me up. And the last thing I want is someone who wanted their question answered, if I could answer it, to not have answered it. So you guys want to hit me up, feel free, and check out those other classes, please.
Awesome. And I will be sending along a follow-up email to everybody. I'll include Antonio's email address and the slides and some of the resources that were mentioned today. So you'll have all that in one place. And I'll include the link to sign up for our January training. So with that, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today, and happy planting.
All right. Happy holidays, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right, Celeste. Nos vemos pronto, okay?
Okay. See you, Antonio. Thank you.
I'll send this. I'll make it a PDF and send it to you.
Perfect. All right.
Okay. We'll see you soon.
Bye,
All right.
y'all.
Bye-bye.